how are we doing? Are you feeling okay? Yeah? We're all good? Alright. Now I'm going to tell you about how we can kind of turn this ship around. So first of all, I'm going to tell you about Extinction Rebellion. So what is Extinction Rebellion? So these guys are two of the main founders. This is Gail Bradbrook and Roger Hallam. And Gail Bradbrook has got a PhD in molecular biology. Roger Hallam did his PhD looking at social change over time and how we're able to, the environmental movement and social change. Because both of them had been activists for a long time, and within the group they were working within, and they were getting so frustrated, going, we're doing all this stuff, like we sign petitions and we go to rallies and all of these kind of things, and we're leading lives that are reducing our carbon footprint as much as we can, but we're just not getting anywhere, and we're so close to the tipping point now. So Roger did his PhD to look at, okay, well, what does the science say about how to be able to make change? If we looked scientifically at social change over time, what does that tell us about what the best way is to affect some change? So some of the research that he looked at was this research by Erica Chenoweth, and she analysed over time social movements where they were trying to get their government to do something different, essentially. And a lot of this research was looking at kind of a totalitarian kind of regime and how they were able to overthrow that. And what they found, looking at that research, is that 3.5% was the kind of crucial tipping point, where if you had less than that, people who were involved, then it may or may not work. But of all of the movements over hundreds of years that they looked at, if you got a critical mass of more than 3.5%, there was not one that wasn't successful. So that, right? So 3.5%. It's not everyone. It's not everyone, which is why you don't need to talk to the climate deniers on your Facebook page. You can leave them right over there. We looked at that bell curve before. Climate deniers are at that end. The 3.5% is up this end.
And participation means signing a petition down to lying down on the...
It means getting out there on the streets. Participation in active, yes. Very, very good question. And so we'll talk about what that means. Yeah. So there's also these particular kind of events over time that they looked at. So for a great example is the civil rights movement. And what they used was non-violent civil disobedience to be able to change the system. And Martin Luther King's great quote here is that one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. And when you look at the situation we're in from that first half of the talk that I just gave, you can understand that these people are not making decisions that are in society's best interests. Far from it. So we have a moral obligation to do what we can in order to change that. There's also a great history of civil disobedience in across the world, but this is the Franklin Dam in Tasmania in the 70s. And I'm going to get the number wrong, but it's about 1,500, I think 1,300, 1,500 people who were arrested during that blockade. And of course, if you don't know a lot about that, Google it and have a quick look. But essentially, they were successful. They were trying to build a dam there, and lots of people kind of got in and said, no, actually, this is, number one, it's not your land. This is Aboriginal land. You can't just kind of do what you want. And number two, this is going to absolutely decimate the ecosystems here. And the Franklin River, now runs freely. So there's a great kind of history of using...
Actually, Bob Hawke was instrumental in stopping it, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, right.
His intervention was critical.
Yeah. So...
Are you talking about Bob Brown or Bob Brown?
Bob
Brown.
Bob Brown certainly started it and got the kind of action going.
Withdrew the federal assent to the project.
So of course, again, over time, the Gandhi, Indian independence, women's suffrage, they've all used non-violent civil disobedience as a way of affecting change. So this is the second and final quote that I have for you tonight, this afternoon rather, of a slide full of words. This is from Roger Hallam, and it just kind of sums up really nicely the strategy. So the strategy of Extinction Rebellion is based on three observations. Firstly, that through disruption, the breaking of laws, do you get the attention that you need. Secondly, only through sacrifice, the willingness to be arrested and to go to prison, do people take seriously what you are saying. And thirdly, only through being respectful to ourselves, the public and the police, do we change the hearts and minds of our opponents, which makes it easier for them to negotiate with us. That really kind of sums up the strategy of Extinction Rebellion. And I want to just point out here that this is not saying that every single one of you needs to go out and get yourself arrested to be part of the cause. That's not what that says. It is crucial that as part of the broader movement that we do have people who are willing to do that. And I'm certainly not going to dissuade you if you would like to be one of those people. But many people just aren't in a position to do that. There's a small and crucial part of Extinction Rebellion, but there's a whole other side of it and a way that you can contribute to that overall movement without putting yourself out on the line and getting arrested. I'll come to that. So, I mean, it sounds kind of radical, right? Getting yourself arrested and going out and blocking a road. But this is Sir David Attenborough who tells us that in the face of the science that we are looking at the moment, we cannot be radical enough. So what we're talking about here is non-violent direct action or mass participation, civil disobedience. They're kind of pretty much interchangeable, those terms. So just so you know, you'll hear reference to either one of them. And what it looks like is a whole lot of people getting out there on the streets, blocking roads, causing disruption. And we get this question a lot: why do you have to disrupt everyday people? Can't you just be a bit I just want to get home, can't you do that? And the answer to that question is, I'd much rather not. I really don't want to do that at all. But we've got 8 years at best before we hit this tipping point, and we have tried absolutely everything else. And this is what the research, the scientific social research, tells us is effective in creating social change. We have no choice if we want a livable future for our children and grandchildren and ourselves. Remember, some of that stuff I was showing you was 2050. This is not that long away. So the key principles of the civil disobedience in terms of Extinction Rebellion: it's respectful. So we're going to go through later the principles, the key kind of principles and values of Extinction Rebellion, and one of those is that we are steadfastly non-violent, and that we are really very focused on being very respectful with the police. So every action that we undertake, there's a significant kind of planning and liaison with the police beforehand. So they're very well aware of that we're going to be blocking the road, and they make sure that, for example, ambulances can get through if they need to. In terms of that blocking the road, it's really no different from like the Moomba Festival or any of those, you know, roadworks. All these things. But in terms of, you know, the grand final parade, that's actually what I was trying to think of just now. We do this actually all the time. It's just that they didn't kind of, you know, the government didn't okay it when we're doing it. But again, very good reason, and there's nothing to suggest that, you know, it's a particularly bad thing to be blocking a road. It's disruptive. And again, we get this question a lot: why do you have to stop everyday people? And, you know, I did a bunch of interviews during the Spring Rebellion that we had recently, and lots of the time I got asked that question, and the answer is always, well, if we weren't blocking the road, would you be here asking me questions right now? You wouldn't. You wouldn't. You have a mass rally and people just walk on by. I mean, the School Strike for Climate was great and it's important, but it was in the news for a day when it was there, and then they just, you know, that's it. You know, I felt like this real kind of on the day after that, like, oh, it was great and it was awesome, but the reality is that alone is not enough. We have to disrupt.
It's only going to work if they stop going to school.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good.
Everyone would panic.
Yeah, that's right.
The sacrifice bit.
The sacrifice bit. So this is the other thing. By the way, I'm happy to send out a copy, like a PDF of the slides, so that you can have some of these details. Yeah. It's sacrificial. It carries much more weight when you have people who are saying, I am putting myself on the line. I'm willing to spend the night in prison. I'm willing to get myself arrested, because that's how important it is. And that makes people go, oh, really? That's how you feel about this? And that's why it's really important that we have people from all walks of life doing it. So unfortunately, it's very easy for the press to kind of dismiss us and say, just, go get a job, you hippies. But the reality is, the people who are out there getting arrested, we had people, Percy was 92, who was getting out there blocking roads. We had young people who were involved. We had people from all walks of life, doctors, psychologists, bricklayers, everyone. This is not about being a hippie. This is about wanting a livable future. And the backfiring response. And what this is that when you kind of block a road or cause an action, and you're very respectful the entire time, steadfastly non-violent, have done everything you possibly can, and then the police come in and go very heavy-handed in a way that is clearly kind of at odds with what you're doing, you get this backfiring response where there's a shift in the public's opinion going, well, hang on a minute, they're allowed to protest, they weren't actually doing anything, they were just kind of blocking the road, why did you go in there with the pepper spray? And a good example of this is a couple of months ago in Paris, there was a blocking, and the police came out and it was very, very peaceful. And in fact, it also happened to be on a day that was the hottest ever in Paris. It was like 45 degrees, and 45.9, there we go. And the police came out with pepper spray, and there was this huge kind of backlash from the public, which increased the support for Extinction Rebellion. And what happens is that when you get that mass participation, civil disobedience, this is again Erica Chenoweth, who is the one who did the research on the magical 3.5%. When security forces are looking at the sheer numbers of people and thinking, are we going to arrest all of them if we've got space? What are we going to do? How are we going to actually do the processing of that? They may just come to the conclusion that the ship has sailed and they don't want to go down with the ship. And this is where we need to get to that critical mass of having enough people involved. And I want to point out here as well that if you are to participate in some of these actions, you do not have to be one of the people who want to get arrested. So I participated in lots of these during the Spring Rebellion, and I'm not in a position to get arrested because I've got a psychology registration. And APRA can't tell me whether or not that would affect my registration. And I'm a bit concerned in the current climate whether they might start coming down very hard on people as a result of the government telling them that that's what they have to do. And I'm the primary breadwinner of my family, so I'm not willing to risk my income at this point in time because I've got 4 children. But what I did is I went out there and I blocked, the bridge or the road and all the things that I was doing. Then when the police say, okay, that's it, you need to move off the road now, I moved off the road. And most people do. And then there's a core sort of group of people who say, no, I'm not going to. And then they stay and they get arrested. And there's a whole lot of other people who are supporting those people. And so you can still participate in this, even if you're not somebody who wants to be getting yourself on the front line and getting arrested. So 17th of November, I should update this slide because that's last year, 2018, is when Extinction Rebellion really kind of formally, they kind of came out in about October and said we're a thing. They've been planning it since about May. So just keep that in mind. Think about how much we've done. That's like a year and a half, and there's a whole lot of success that has happened since then. But that was the first big action where they blocked 5 London bridges and caused a huge amount of disruption. They thought that they would have hundreds and hundreds of people coming, but actually they had 6,000 because by the first day when people started seeing it and understanding what they were doing and going, oh, finally, here's something that I can do about this awful situation that we're in, more people started coming and coming and coming. So they did that in November, caused lots of disruption, caused lots of conversation, didn't get the demands met, which I'm going to tell you about in a moment. But then again in April, was it April or March in this year, some more blockades, a whole lot of disruption happened again. And it was just after that the UK declared a climate emergency. Now, of course, they're not acting on that as well as they should be yet. That's the next step. But the first thing you've got to do is admit that you have a problem. That's the first step, and they have done that crucial first step. And you will see loads of places now. It just came out the other day that climate emergency was like, the latest kind of buzzword and had increased in its use like 10,000% or something like that. Melbourne, so Darebin were the first ones, the first council in the world to declare a climate emergency. And so what happened is that, success. It actually does work. And then, look, I'm not saying they've solved the problem, but they have gone a significant way in that 6 months that they first started, certainly in the UK, compared to all the work that those activists there had been doing for years and years and years, decades. This works. We know that it works. And it's going to work a whole lot better if we can get more people doing it. That's when it works best. So what does it actually look like to do this disruption? This is where it gets really great, because it's actually really, really fun. Greg spoke about this before. So all of the actions that I've been to, because everyone's there for the one reason, there's this amazing sense of connection and community that I've actually never really experienced, because it's, you go there and you all know that you're there to be saving the future. Like, what better reason could you be there for? It's creative. This is the Red Rebels, which you might have seen at some of these things, and they dress up in this amazing costume, and it's just really beautiful and impressive. And they just sort of walk very, quietly around, and then people come up to you going, "What's with them?" And you go, "Well, let me tell you. Have you heard about the climate emergency? We've got 3 demands." And then you go from there. It's connected. These are photos from some actions in Melbourne. It's connected. It is family friendly. So Greg mentioned before, Petra, I think it was, that I'm one of the organisers of the families arm of Extinction Rebellion. And in the Spring Rebellion, we organised a whole host of activities down at Carlton Gardens that were not at the front line. I don't want my kids out there getting arrested, although my 10-year-old is keen. Keen bean. Mum, please let me get arrested. I really want to do it. I'm like, you need to calm down. He did actually, just on that, and the opening day of the Spring Rebellion, I gave a speech, and he came up to me at the end and he gave me a big hug and he said, "Mum, I'm going to go vegetarian." So he's doing his bit. He's really doing his bit. But it is family friendly. It's bold, and it's amazing. It's really it's really wonderful. And just a point on the family friendly stuff as well is that there's been a little bit in the out in the media about kids, and Scott Morrison coming out and saying, "Oh, no need for them to be anxious. No need for you to be anxious." One, that's just a blatant lie. There is a need for them to be anxious. But 2, the research actually shows us that when you tell kids and are honest with the state that things are at, and then you give them a way that they can take action, they're actually more empowered, more resilient, and less anxious. That's what the research shows. But you've got to have both. You can't just say, this is all really, really, really bad, deal with it, 10-year-old. But what you can do is you've got to speak in an age-appropriate way, obviously. These slides I wouldn't be showing to my children. Some of the slides that I've just shown you in the previous first half of the talk. But we certainly do have honest conversations, and I answer their questions honestly at the kind of age level that they're at. They range from 3 to 12, my kids. But then we talk about ways to get involved. We talk about that it's important not to waste our food, and that it's important to be using public transport whenever we can, and it's important to try and eat less meat. And that's my meat-loving 10-year-old who decided to go vegetarian. You give them ways that they can be involved. My 12-year-old got up at the Spring Rebellion and sung a Freddie Mercury song, 2 Freddie Mercury songs. He dedicated to Adani, and got up and instead of said, "We will rock you," sung, "We will stop you," because he's a drama kid and he kind of loves it. So they're all kind of doing their bit, and they're empowered. So actually we do need to be talking to our kids about this. Now, I've told you a bit about the tactics of Extinction Rebellion, but what do they actually want? What are we trying to ask for? We've got 3 demands. The first demand, you've got to admit you've got a problem. You first of all have to tell the truth. Government must tell the truth by declaring a climate and ecological emergency, working with other institutions to communicate the urgency for change. That's the first step. That's our first demand. And it's important, again, when we come back to that smoke-filled room experiment, it's important that we do tell the truth about the state of the emergency. And I think what went wrong in a lot of the environmental movement over the decades past is that there was a little bit, let's just try and we'll just push it a little bit. We won't kind of tell them how bad it is because people will get really scared. But actually, it's entirely appropriate for us to be scared right now. And we need to be scared. And we know that in a whole lot of emergency messaging, that what you need to do is to have those two crucial things. You need to know the extent of the threat, and you need to know what action to take. And then you're in a good position to be able to deal with that information. If we just told people things are really, really terrible and then gave them nothing, then yeah, that's not going to go well for people psychologically. But if you give them both, that's okay. And you can imagine in bushfire season, having the fire chief come up and go, well, yes, there is a massive fire very close to your home, but I don't want to scare you, so I'm not going to tell you. Not appropriate. What you say is, yes, it's really, really bad, and here is how you get the hell out of there. And again, there's lots of kind of evidence this in terms of public health messaging as well, is that you need to make it personal. You need to say what the threat actually is and say what can actually happen to you, and then you need to kind of give that action and support people in being able to make that change. The second demand is that they need to act now. Government must act now to halt biodiversity loss and reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2025. Seems impressive, doesn't it? Why are we asking for net zero by 2025? Because that's what the scientists say give us the best chance of turning this ship around. That's why. We are not coming at this from an economic point of view. We are not coming from this from maybe slowly kind of transition. We are coming from this from what the science says. But speaking of an economic point of view, have a think about how fast we can actually move. So this is a graph of expenditure over time. This is World War I. This is World War II. What this graph doesn't have on it, actually, is the global financial crisis. And in fact, in America, for example, they spent $70 trillion, I can't even wrap my head around how much that is, $70 trillion bailing out the banks in the global financial crisis. Just so happens that that's the costings of Bernie Sanders' Green New Deal. It's doable. We can do it. Yes, it'll be money. Yes, we need to look after the people who work in coal. We need to make sure it's a just transition for workers. Yes, but we can do it. There's a history of it. We're just lacking the political will, and that's where we need to come in and force them. And we need to go beyond politics. Governments must create and be led by the decisions of a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice. Why? Because our politicians can't make good decisions about this. They are handcuffed to the coal companies. That's just the reality. I wish that wasn't the case, but it is. So a citizens' assembly is where you get a random sortition of individuals to make decisions, and they are given information by the experts, and they then get to make the decisions, and then the government then enacts it. But the decisions about what to do are made by people who are not biased in any other way. All they want is a livable future, presumably, for themselves and their children, but they are not beholden to coal companies and dependent on their donations. And this, if you haven't heard of it before, it sounds kind of out there, a citizens' assembly. I sort of thought so when I first kind of heard about the idea, but it's worked in a bunch of other countries for a range of different things. So this is in Ireland. They used a citizens' assembly when they were looking at their abortion laws, amongst other things, because their parliament was very caught up in the kind of Catholicism and how that kind of interacted. So they used a citizens' assembly effectively. There's a good kind of evidence base for being able to use this. Now so Extinction Rebellion is global, and some countries,
Looks like there's good evidence base for that. Is there any documentation on that we can read about the citizens' assembly? Because I find that is the most difficult thing to really imagine. Our whole government actually being advised by this group of people, just like a jury.
Yeah, so there's plenty of evidence on that, and probably the best thing to do is that there's a document put out by Extinction Rebellion that goes through the kind of theory behind it, where it's been useful and how it would actually work.
I read that, but I'm not that convinced, and I just sort of can't see how this would work.
Yeah.
You can lock on and disrupt, but to make that transition, to me, that's a huge leap of the imagination. I need to see it more.
Yeah. So, for example, in the UK, they have created a citizens' assembly. and unfortunately it's not, their decisions are not kind of binding on the government, so it's problematic. But they have gone to those steps to be able to create a citizens' assembly. And yeah, look, I agree with you. It's that there are a lot of these things that we kind of look at and go, oh, well, that sounds really hard. How is that going to work?
Look, I mean,
But there's...
it's the public that has to drive this in numbers. And we had an election 6 months ago, and it was clear that are not sufficient enough people were really concerned about these issues. Therefore, it says to me they don't understand. They don't.
I think not enough people were just aware even, and that's because it comes back to the first demand. Our governments haven't told the truth. So there's a whole lot of people who are not able to kind of make that decision.
But that's then the media. I mean, the media is talking about it much more this year than what it was. But it really needs some of the people that lead shows on in the media, on television and radio. They could really lead a much broader discussion. Why aren't those people, even in the ABC, that's tax funded, why aren't they leading a truly direct...
I think ABC are probably worried about their funding too if they start kind of coming out and doing this. So it's very kind of complex, isn't it? And look, I take your point. It is one of those things that it's hard to see how it's going to work until you kind of get to that point. And I think the reality is that at this point we're so far away from that. We're at number one. We just need our government to tell the truth at this point. And then look, if they tell the truth and start acting and make decisions, we won't need a citizens' assembly. Yeah. But the reality is that this is part of what we need to do to make them be able to get to that point. And that's why we're pushing for that as much as possible. Yeah.
The chap, Craig, I can't pronounce his last name, Rucastle,
did
the war on plastic, is at the moment preparing a series on climate change, which is going to come out sometime in the next year. So, you know, that one would hope, I mean, that was brilliant, the stuff on plastic. I feel like he touched everybody with that. So hopefully that will be a very... There is lots of
good stuff happening, and look, I really feel that over the past couple of months there has been a little bit of a shift. You know, there's definitely more conversations.
Drought and fires.
The drought and fires are forcing a conversation. The Spring Rebellion also forced a conversation. There was the motion to declare a climate emergency that was put forward by some members of the Labor Party, but the Greens as well. That had been a long time in preparation, and one vote, you know, it came down to. But there's definitely things that are moving. Now, so this slide, so the XR is global, and across in some countries they have added a fourth demand, which addresses sort of specifically climate justice and recognising Indigenous sovereignty. Australia hasn't done that yet, but we do have a climate justice working group, and they are looking at this and addressing this. And I think the hesitation immediately was that we don't want to kind of just jump in and give lip service to this really important issue. And it's important that the people who are starting this are not just kind of coming in and making decisions like white people have done for, you know, millennia, close to. And so what we need to do is make sure that we've got people involved and that we are actually really thinking this through and working out what is the best way to kind of address this. So just to kind of flag that climate justice is a huge part of this, and you know, the colonialisation of our country and of other countries is a big part of why we're in this mess. You know, there's lots of research looking at the fires and that, you know, Indigenous ways of land management for fire would have mean that we're not in this crisis that we're in, even with the warming that we've got at this point. So it's a really kind of important part of it. And this is just to kind of flag that the Jabberong trees down near Ararat, they're still kind of standing there and holding that space. And so, you know, if there's a way that you would like to kind of get involved, going down and being a body there is a really important thing. And if that kind of climate justice side of things is something you're particularly interested in, then getting involved in the climate justice working group, which the next part we're going to tell you how to get involved in all our working groups. So just a couple more slides to finish off this session, where we talk a little bit more about XR and what it actually involves and how it works. And in the next session we'll go into how it works in a bit more detail. But there are 10 principles and values that underpin Extinction Rebellion. And these are the 10 values here. So we have a shared vision of change. We all agree to those 3 demands and agree that we need to be working towards those. We set our mission on what is necessary, not what sounds like a nice thing to Scott Morrison, but what is necessary, net zero by 2025. We need a regenerative culture. This is something that is really unique to XR, and I think that is a really important part of it, is knowing that once you start to kind of assimilate this information and really bring it into your worldview, it can be quite a heavy burden to bear. And so we need to make sure we know this is not just a quick fix. So we need to make sure that we are supporting ourselves and each other, and that we take the time back if we need to. And there are lots of regenerative aspects of XR that make it really, really quite amazing and a really special movement to be part of. We openly challenge ourselves and this toxic system. We value reflecting and learning, and certainly, again at the Spring Rebellion, there was a big part of that was looking at, okay, what are the actions that we've done beforehand, and what do we do right and what do we do wrong? Because we're all, we're just new, we're just kind of starting this up here. But openly going, okay, well, maybe that didn't go as well as it could. Let's take that on board for next time, and really putting that at the forefront. We welcome everyone and every part of everyone. We actively mitigate power. We avoid blaming and shaming. I think this is another thing that is really important about Extinction Rebellion, because one of the things that I've noticed in the environmental movement is that it's very easy to say, oh, well, you're not you can't be an environmental activist because you drive a car, or you eat meat, or you fly, or you have 4 children, which has been a criticism that has been posed to me many times in the activism that I've done, was that, well, you've got to have 4 children, you can't be moving towards this. The reality is, I didn't know when I was having children how bad this was, or I wouldn't have had 4. But despite that, every single person, we are all working within the system that we are in. And, we talked before about the individual versus systemic change. There's only so much we can do with individual changes. And it's really difficult to make those individual changes at a level that is going to really address this problem. What we need to do is address the system, so we don't blame or shame anybody who's making individual choices that we might not agree with. We just want everyone involved to disrupt the system.
I don't quite understand the actively mitigate power. What is exactly meant by that?
Yeah, so I'm going to come back to that after I go to the last one, because they're related. So the second last one is that we are a non-violent network, and non-violence is a key part of our ethos, but it's also relevant to the research. So when we come back to Erica Chenoweth's research, she compared those regimes that used violence to try and change the system to those that were non-violent. And actually the non-violent regimes were twice as successful than the violent regimes. And also the ones that used violence that were successful were very much more likely to fall down after a couple of years. So there's not only are we ethically saying that we don't want to use this as a method to effect change, the research actually suggests that would be the most sensible choice anyway. We are based on autonomy and decentralisation, and this is where I'm going to come back to the point that you've just raised about what does actively mitigating power mean. And this is about saying that part of the mess that we're in is about people getting to the point where they have so much power and so much money that it goes to their heads and they don't make good decisions. And so the way Extinction Rebellion works is that we are a decentralised system, which means that there's not one person. It's not Roger Hallam sitting up there like a cult. It's not like that at all. He and Gail have kind of started this. But the way that it works is that if you agree that that you want to be working towards those 3 demands, and you also agree to be guided by these principles and values, then anybody can be taking action in the name of XR. So it is decentralised. There's not one person who gets to have a say. Now that's to kind of actively say we don't want people getting to the point of having lots of power within this system. We are trying to get away from the system where lots of people have lots of power.
was mentioned in the paper, Greta Thunberg the other day refused an environmental award. And she said the same thing. She just wanted to take the ego out of it. She said, this is too late in history to be giving out awards.
Yeah.
And everyone knows she's been honored.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, an award that was something like 80 grand or something had attached to it. Yeah.
I think that's in that spirit. Take
That's
the ego
right.
out of it.
Yep, absolutely. That is absolutely right. Now, of course, in theory, that's all well and good to have a decentralised system. In practice, that makes things kind of tricky sometimes. Sometimes it can be easier to have somebody kind of calling the shots. But the reality is, it's important. It's an important part of the system. And in the next session, we're going to talk a little bit more about how does that actually work then? If it's decentralised, what does that actually look like? But before we get to that, in terms of just a brief kind of overview of what it looks like, is that there's a whole lot of working groups, and then there's kind of a central coordination group. Okay, and so you can choose if you wanted to be involved in XR to be involved at a variety of different levels. But basically the way it works is that if you decide that you're going to rock up every week and contribute, then you start to be able to be involved in making the decision. And then you can form sort of smaller working groups that take on a mandate or say, okay, we've decided within the working group that we need to work out a way to do this. You guys go away, work on that document, come back and bring it back. And then you have kind of people from each of the working groups getting together and coming into the coordination group. So this is where, again, action and logistics is where they work on the actual kind of blockades or the events that we do where people are going out to get arrested. But there's a whole lot of other working groups where you can get involved that certainly wouldn't involve any of that. In fact, you could still even be involved in action and logistics but not be out there yourself. You could just do the coordinating beforehand. There's media and messaging, so social media, communication, articles, blogs, a whole lot of this stuff. There's regenerative culture group that put on lots of activities and regen kind of events for people, and also are actively looking after the arrestees and just the people who are kind of coming along to actions as well. There's the arts group, because you'll notice from those photos that I showed you before that Extinction Rebellion events are really beautiful, and it's a really awesome way of being able to get attention, because people can't just walk past that. They kind of look and, you see them when you're out on the streets with the Red Rebels and with the flags, all these kind of amazing, there's a boat that they brought in, the pink boat, named Tuvalu. The disco! Oh my God. There is going to be a global disco obedience. If you didn't see that, I'll put that video on in the next one, so you can see the disco obedience, because that was really cool. So you might decide, I just want to stay. I don't actually want to go to any of these things. I'm a hermit, but I'm going to sit inside and I'm going to sew, and that's contributing. Or you might decide, I've got some skills in finance, and there's got to be some way to fund all of these things. How are we kind of doing all of that? Speaking of which, if you would like to contribute to the costs of the room today, there is a tin there. You can kind of donate if you want to. Or you might decide to be in outreach and training, which is what this is. Coming out and telling people about it and getting people on board, or being out there on the streets doing actions and handing out flyers. Research, we haven't really got research up and going here. This is from the UK. But if you're a researcher, then we should do. So there's plenty of ways that we can that you can get involved. And this is just kind of a slide that speaks to that a little bit. The thing that I really like about this slide is that I gave this to my best friend to do me up a beautiful slide, because I'm not very visual, and said, just put up there like all of these things about ways that you can get involved in XR. And it was not till I was delivering this to the first time that I realised that she had just sneakily added in ladder technician, just to mess with me. Exactly! What the hell does that mean? You tell us. If you think you can be a ladder technician and contribute to XR, I challenge you. Throw down the gauntlet. You tell me what you can do. Now look, there's also a huge other range of ways that you can contribute. And there's a great talk on YouTube by Dr. Genevieve Gunther. It goes for about 40 minutes. It's really worth watching, actually, if you're interested. I can put that in the in an email that we can send around with you as the slides if you like. But she looks at kind of communicating about climate change, and she talks about sort of 3 different ways that you can have an effect. So you can make individual lifestyle choices, and they are things like, the big 4 are not flying, using public transport, like not using a car, eating less meat, or going to a totally plant-based diet and having fewer children. So they're the kind of 4 big things. So you can make those individual changes, but you can also make changes at a cultural level. So be able to change things within your sphere of people who you speak to. And they might be like organising kind of groups where you get out and you talk about permaculture as opposed to agriculture. Or you get together and fix a whole lot of things. Like you change the culture from just consuming to a different focus that is more climate oriented. And then there's the political sphere, which is getting involved in Extinction Rebellion and going straight to the top and trying to disrupt the system. There's also things like, there are, you can donate to Extinction Rebellion, you can donate to a range of different kind of, for example, movements that are helping farmers to plant trees and things like that. You can share things on Facebook, very, very easy to do, and it's one kind of small thing to get more people in your network at least aware of some of this stuff. Fundraising activities. Divesting is also another really big one. So if you have got your money in one of the big four banks, then you are investing in coal companies. And most of the time, most people's superannuation is also investing in the coal companies. So one of the big things that you can do is to divest your personal funds away from those. And one of the easiest things that you can do is talk about it. So we talked at the very start about the smoke-filled room experiment and the bystander effect, and how as humans we make our decisions based on social information. And if all the people around you in your social sphere are not talking about climate change, then you think you're just one of those guys at the start playing golf with a fire raging in the background. You think it's all fine. And the research tells us that most people are concerned about climate change, but most people don't talk about it. Why? Because it's kind of socially uncomfortable sometimes. I've started talking about it a whole lot more at both my workplaces, and there are some people who you start talking to and their eyes glaze over and you go, oh, am I that person? I am. But this is the thing. If it's not just me, but if it's other people who are also talking to that work colleague, then they are going to go, hang on a minute, everyone's talking about this, maybe I should start to look more into it. And then they start talking to all their people, and then they start talking, and then all of a sudden we've overthrown capitalism. Sorry. Might take a little bit longer than that, but you see what I mean, right? We all have our influence, individual choices, cultural choices, political choices. You do whatever you decide that you want to do. So what we're going to do now is focus on the fact that we are all in this together. And before we finish up this first session, which you are welcome to leave at the end of, after this we're going to talk a bit more about how XR actually works. If you're looking at this thinking, I want to get involved, I want to be in a working group, I want to contribute to XR in some way, then stay around for the next bit. But first of all, we're going to take just a short break, 5 or 10 minutes, grab a cup of tea, and also just kind of talk to the people around you. So what we're going to do is come back, we'll grab the cup of tea, and then we'll come back, and we might actually just do kind of two groups, so this side of the room and this side of the room. And just kind of within that group, if you don't feel comfortable talking, don't talk. That's absolutely fine. You can just listen to the other people who are there. But there's always a couple in a group who are happy to kind of jump in and share. And if you're one of those people, we want to hear from you about what you think that you might like to do with this information. And you might be thinking, I'm just going to start talking about it more. I'm going to start sending some emails at my work and start kind of talking a bit more about this. Or you might think, I'm going to host a bit of an event. And get some friends around and talk about this, or you might be thinking, like, sign me up, I want to get arrested. And that's fine too. So I want you to do that. So grab a cup of tea, we're going to do that, come back and have the group work.
If I could just say, if anyone is leaving at the moment, but they would like to be on XR East Side, because we're the local group here that has organised this, we have a weekly dispatch that we send out. So you'll all be on Action Network, so you'll get the Action Network weekly email, but we send one out that tells you about our meetings and what we're doing. So if you are leaving, because it has been a while, I understand, and you do want to still receive that, there should be a piece of paper, just write your name on it. That's all you need to do, because we've got the rest of your details, and we'll make sure you get that email. And that way you can find out more about what we're doing locally.
Also, we've got, if you do want or need to leave, we've created a kind of welcome or starter kit pack, and it's got elementary information about Extinction Rebellion and working groups, the principles, the 3 core demands, and where to next. So please take one of these as well if you do need to leave. A lot to digest.
Yeah.
If you wanted to be able to tell other people where they might hear you presenting, how do we find that out?
Sure. So there's a whole lot of introductory talks that happen all around Melbourne, that we've got a range of different kind of presenters who do that. And the best way to find out about that is to sign up for so the emails that you'll get from Action Network will say all of the upcoming talks. The other thing, if you want to, you can sign up on Facebook and you'll see them on there as well. But otherwise, just kind of on the email. This is being live streamed, and we will that will be kind of available afterwards. So if you wanted to say to someone, I went to this particular talk and here I want you to watch this, you can do that as well. And what we might do, Petra, is try and send an email out to the people who attended this with the PDF of the slides, and then a link to that so that you can forward that around. And have a look at the emails that come out. Will tell you all the kind of next events that happen after that. But do stick around for a little bit. Talk about what you're planning to do with this information. Just maybe 2 minutes to grab a drink and a cup of tea, and then we'll come back into 2 groups.